Hare Krishna, and welcome to part number 4 of this series by the GBC Strategic Planning team, a series on GBC History. Let's see the title for today. This is the title of the series. Always wanted to know about the GBC, but we're hesitant to ask. And today we have next part 4, reflections on the Zonal Acarya Days. Thank you. Today we have two very special guests who are simultaneously guests and hosts, because they are the senior-most members of the GBC Strategic Planning team. I'm talking of the chairperson, His Grace Gopal Bhatta Prabhu, and His Grace Pancharatna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
So they are both disciples of His Divine Grace. They see Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and they were active in ISKCON in various leadership positions throughout their lives, and also throughout the period that we are analyzing. We are talking about the period from 1978 to 1987. And we characterize this time as the Zonal Acarya Days. These are the days, these are the years in which the first 11 gurus of ISKCON, who were also GBCs, they were serving as GBC. They were also serving as gurus, the first initiating spiritual masters after Srila Prabhupada. And as we heard also in the last part from His Holiness Hridayananda Maharaj, different people have different experiences of this period and different experience of the relations with these devotees. So we want to start with a broad description. We want to hear from the Prabhus we have today with us. Where were you at the time? What were you doing during those years? And how did you experience this shift of relation? You were good brothers with, of course, all the GBCs. Some of them became gurus and, colloquially speaking, zonal acharyas. So how did you relate with all this? Any of you can start, please.
You want to start, Pancharatna Prabhu, or do you want me to?
You've already started. Continue.
Hare Krishna. Okay. Maybe I should start on November 14th, 1977. This is the date that His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, departed this mortal world. At the time, I was a temple president of a major temple in the world, and the GBC member was more or less resident there also. So he and I went to the Mangala Arati, and he did most of the talking. I stood next to him and announced that His Divine Grace had disappeared. And when that ended, I went to my office. I didn't turn on the light because I didn't want anybody to see that I was in there. And I sat in darkness for 2 hours. And the conclusion of that period was two things. Srila Prabhupada gave me everything I needed to be a good devotee. And second, whatever the future was going to be, it was going to be different and whatever I thought it was in the past. And I didn't know what that future was going to be. So, okay, that kind of template actually carried me through these days. In 1978, taking the whole year as a whole year, I would say that I would say that many devotees at the time just really wanted to try to make things work, wanted to be good foot soldiers as we had been trained, foot soldiers in Srila Prabhupada's army, ready to sacrifice and do what we could to make this thing kind of happen. And actually during that year, there was a drive to normalcy. Let's keep things moving forward as Srila Prabhupada would want. And then there was this undercurrent of thought, some increasing uneasiness, questions, doubts that would surface. But generally speaking, at least in my circle of direct friends, nobody really wanted to talk too much about it. And rather, those doubts and questions were kind of pushed down and replaced with the drive to normalcy. And some things at least certainly on the surface, were going well. Book distribution was increasing. More devotees were being made. Things had some appearance of really doing well. And then, let's say in the last half of 78, devotees started to have a little bit more arguments about this and that. It's like they missed the fact that Srila Prabhupada was on the planet. And they might have been expecting something more from the leadership or whatever. But I think from my perspective and from my own consciousness, it was the questions and the doubts about how things were going on that you couldn't quite put a pin on. You know how sometimes you know that things are just not quite right, but you don't know what they are. Anyway, we got through 78. Okay. 79 is when the ugly head of absolute authority starts to rise up. And, just a number of things were like really unsettling. I remember one time myself and 4 or 5 other devotees, God brothers, we were standing around having this discussion about some issues. And a visiting guru came by. He walked in the door. Everything stopped the moment he walked in the door. And we were in like a circle. So I opened up a circle like you would imagine being graceful and said, Maharaj, we were talking about whatever the subject was. I don't actually remember the subject. And, but it'd really be good if you told us your opinion on this. And he says, Gopal Bhatta Dasa. By the way, often the notion that some of these leaders would call you Prabhu, that started to vanish. I learned a new name, Gopal Bhatta Dasa, and it stuck with me forever. It's nice being a servant. Gopal Bhatta Dasa, I do not speak opinions. When you people are ready to hear the truth, you can come to me and I will speak it. And that actually was the new mood, or one of the new moods that was happening. crazy things started to happen. A couple of key lady book distributors, they came up with an idea that the resident Zonal Acharya was an incarnation of Rupa Goswami because of his capacity to spread Krishna consciousness, his capacity for his love of Srila Prabhupada's books, etc. And so I go to him and say, you know, Maharaj, you got a problem here. This story is proliferating, and you know, you really have to stop it. Hold on a minute, Gopal. We have to be careful about trampling on people's faith. We don't want to unsettle people. These are a little bit difficult times. And so he let this story go on. Everything started to become a leela. Normal behavior of walking around and talking and doing things, it started to become, in some circles, the leela of this person. Okay. And, you know, it started to get like really unsettling and really difficult to manage. But something else was happening also. The authority, is increasingly becoming absolute. And therefore you don't have any room to question like you once did. I can remember being a sankirtan leader in 1974, 75, even 76. You could always go to a temple president, or you could go to the GBC, and you could have actual arguments and discussions, and sure, you accepted their authority and their final decision, but you could argue with it. The culture started to stop on being able to argue. And one of the things that had nothing to do with a GBC per se, or a guru per se, but it did have to do with leadership, is that our sankirtan had drifted and then strongly moved into, instead of selling books, we were selling things, and then once we sold them, we would give a book. So we had this huge candle shop, or we had this huge button factory. And basically we were making small-time little sales reps for stupid little products out of the sankirtan devotees that were supposed to. You try to argue that, and you just get slammed. So this strong authority thing, and you also in 1978, 79, even 80, there was no real congregation. There was that you could take shelter of. You were either a devotee who lived in the temple, or you blooped. And you had, these were the two dynamics that you had. These were the two choices that you had.
You went to the fringe. You became a fringy.
A fringy was slightly better than bloop. That's right.
Blooped. Yeah, you first you blooped, and then if you stuck around for a little bit, you became we'll accept you as a fringy.
Right. Okay. So socially speaking, there is no support. What are you going to do? So, finally, by 1980, it was like, okay, the Zonal Acharya that I was working for, he figured out, this is my interpretation. He figured out that he needed somebody more compliant. And basically I was out. And I had been a pretty capable person, got a lot of things done. In prior years, I was a very strong sankirtan leader, successful sankirtan leader in the Midwest of the United States. So another guru hears that I'm on my way out, At that time, he happened to have a mobile home. And he said, come with me and travel. And I'm like, geez, what am I going to do? So, okay, leave the family behind, go travel with him. I didn't know to begin with, but for 6 weeks, basically, his intention was to make me a sannyasi. Anybody who knows me knows that it wouldn't have been a very good idea in 1980 for me to be a sannyasi. And finally, we get to another Midwestern temple after 6 weeks and sit down. And he said, Gopal Bhatta Dasa, your problem is that you are too much of an independent thinker. And you're never going to make a sannyasi. And I said, okay, thank you. I'm glad you came with the same conclusion I did. So, but he invited me to stay at one of his temples that were in his zone. Pulled the family up, moved there. Was doing some insignificant service. He was on the surface better to deal with in terms of being a god brother. But I made one fatal mistake. He had several sannyasi god brothers that were in his orbit. I was speaking to one of them. And, the argument was, they're not pure devotees, are they? Not pure devotees as Prabhupada was a pure devotee. And that got reported back to him, and boom. I was not allowed, even though I lived across the street from the temple, I was no longer allowed to come to the temple whatsoever. And now, remember the bloop thing, fringy bloop, I'm persona non grata, and I don't know what to do. Okay, well, you have no money, and you don't know what to do. What do? Well, I got saved some money up, made a little bit of money, and moved the family back to LA. And when I came back to LA, there basically was no service for me. I had to support my family. So that's what I started doing. The entire notion was they stepped in between Srila Prabhupada and Srila Prabhupada's disciples as a general statement. Not in all cases, not every single one of them, but as a general statement, they inserted themselves in between Srila Prabhupada and Srila Prabhupada's disciples. And that was an absolute disaster. So, okay, I've talked for 15 minutes, Pancharatna Prabhu. You give your reflections. Those are mine.
I was in Mayapur. I had moved there in 1976. So I was somewhat away from the environment that you've been talking about. But I was at the ground center of the GBC's meetings and so on. So when I was reflecting back on that time, then I started trying to pick out what were my observations of what was going on and what was my experience and what was I feeling. Because I was not like you were in the midst of the majority of our movement was in America. And in 1977, 78, we were a handful, not a handful, but we were maybe 20 or 30 Western devotees in Mayapur. And in general, in India, we were still fairly small. And the dynamic of our relationships were also quite different. Also, in my case, my GBC at the time had just become a GBC. He was also one of the 11. But it was a very different dynamic. But I did observe things, and I was in the previous interview that Kaunteya Prabhu had with Hridayananda Maharaj. He brought up the topic of the language of furniture, and so that kind of stuck with me, because I observed this language of furniture in unfolding in Mayapur in two different ways. One was the first meeting, 1978, first Gaur Purnima festival after the departure of His Divine Grace. And here we are. Now, what do we do with these new 11 something gurus? And I believe that there was a prep, and everyone's coming, right? So I kind of vaguely remember that in the GBC meeting, which I think happened a little bit before, or maybe it was happening during the big festival time, the decision was made that, well, there would have to be Guru Puja for these devotees. So this was a big thing. I mean, here we are, we're accustomed to having Guru Puja for Srila Prabhupada. And now it's, okay, now we also have to have Guru Puja for these 11. And so 11 Vyasasans were made to put one, and two sides of Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasan. And right after, it was just like a how you could call it, a sequence, a seamless sort of system, that we worship Srila Prabhupada and then we worship these 11. That was the message that was being communicated through the furniture, and of course the systems and so on. I was reminded that in this language of furniture, going back, and of course, well, I guess we had it as well. There was this system that started to be established in the centers throughout ISKCON, where we had Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasan, then we had a Vyasasan for the Acharya, the Guru of that zone, and then another one for some visiting Guru, and then in some cases a third one for a disciple of Srila Prabhupada who wasn't a guru, and maybe a fourth one for someone who was neither, was not any of those categories. So this language of hierarchy of seats became a big part of, and then it extended into the altars. There were permanent pictures of these gurus on the altars in their zones. The names came in, and that was one of the early things, the padas of all sorts, and people trying to figure out, which pada am I going to accept? Got to find another pada. And then it started, and later on, when others came in, then they had to, wait a minute, I got to get a fresh new pada. So we got some strange padas that came in. So this language, this external language, is something that when I look back and I reflect on, is something that became quite prominent. Another reflection, though, that I had, because I wasn't so much in the type of situation you were in, Gopal Bhatta Prabhu. I had my carved out service, which was construction and master planning and so on, and I wasn't. I was already independent in that sense, and working on a level that didn't involve a hierarchy of telling devotees what to do. So it was a different realm. But I did observe, and what I was observing, and I think this is, I don't know, you mentioned it actually in terms of the year 1 and 2, that there was an impression that we've got to maintain Guru Bhakti. That Guru Bhakti, and we know in our, with Srila Prabhupada, the strength that Guru Bhakti had in the movement, the enthusiasm for book distribution, the enthusiasm for everything came because we felt we're serving Srila Prabhupada, and we lived to to get that acknowledgement and that recognition and that smile and that appreciation from him. And we felt it was translated through, the movement in different ways. So these new gurus said, well, we've got to keep this going. And, my relationships in Mayapur were with two devotees, one of whom was with Australia. And I saw the results. I saw, how the team there, they set things up in such a way that they, I would say, kind of exploited the guru's position to rev up, to get those, like you said, to get people out selling candles, and making money, instead of distributing books. So they had to have somebody to give it in imprimatur, because Srila Prabhupada hadn't done that. So we need somebody else to kind of put their stamp on it and push it and be the guru sort of authority that this is all okay. When in fact, I don't know, maybe you can comment on this, but I think to a large extent, the drive for making money through paraphernalia was coming from the temple presidents, who wanted, they saw the opportunity and they went for it. And those and the other GBCs and so on, they went all along with this because they also wanted to see the money. So the whole new mood was coming in like that, and it was exploited. And it's sort of, it was like a win. How would you say? The new gurus were kind of using the situation, and the temple presidents were using them as well. So there was, in the back of the minds, I have to say, the spirit was, we've got to, like you said, we've got to continue. We've got to. My wife says that when she heard the news, the mood in the temple of Srila Prabhupada's passing was, Prabhupada wants us to go on. We have to go on. We have to continue. That was his message, that his Vani is more important, that we have to continue with the mission. No time to grieve even. Just go back out, distribute the books. And then, of course, it started to morph into other things. So, yeah, those are some of the reflections that come immediately to my mind for that initial period. Then, as you say, things started to get wonky, and there's other stories there.
Yeah. So, and one of the reasons that I had to leave the presidency was because I pretty much knew that my Zonal Acharya just wasn't chanting his rounds, or hardly chanting at all, and so trying to gingerly, properly, not really being able to deal directly with him as a god brother, but having to, look up a bit. Maharaj, it'd be really good if you chanted your rounds with the devotees so that everybody saw you chanting. It would be an inspiration to them. Inquiries like this over time, got nowhere. I mean, finally, there was some direct discussion. You can't be chanting your rounds. The only reason you come to Mangal Arati is to pull me out so that we could have a meeting. I mean, come on. and just that alone was enough reason for me to move on. But by the time I came back to Los Angeles, which I think was 82, or the fall of 81, there were a number of devotees that were moving behind, leaving the movement or leaving their service. And over the years of 81, 82, 83, 84, there were scores and scores of devotees in America where God brothers and God sisters were backing up from ISKCON. And remember, we had no shelter outside of ISKCON. There were no communities. And so by 85, 86, you still had a position where the GBC were in the background. At least that's how we experienced it. The GBC as a body, you didn't really ever hear about them anymore. You had a GBC Zonal Acharya. That was the god of the zone. Exactly how much you ever heard about GBC broadly, not much. And so now communities started to develop a little bit, where gatherings would start taking place at people's homes, and talk about how things aren't going right and this and that. And I couldn't relate to that either. And so in 1983, in the fall, I actually started my first real business, because I had to support my family and I didn't want to just go get a job. And on the inauguration of that business, I went to Srila Prabhupada's quarters. And in a real tearful mood, I basically said to him, Srila Prabhupada, I don't know much of the details of your own struggle with the Gaudiya Math, but I know that you struggled. And I'm really struggling here. And I look at you as a very rich man, and rich men have short, medium, and long-term investments. And I am just not going to pay off for you on a short-term basis, and maybe not even on a midterm basis. So if you would kindly look at me as a person that has the potential of being a longer-term investment, that you won't realize anything in the short term, then that's what I think I have to do with myself. And from there, I just did a little bit of service here, a little bit of service there, for a reasonable period of time. I believe that many of our God brothers and God sisters had similar thoughts. And that's the actions that, similar actions that they took, I think. Of course, some God brothers and God sisters, they stuck with it. And they were heroes. And somehow or other, they just kept their position of being a loyal foot soldier, and gradually things seemed to get better and better. Sometime after the, I don't know, 1990, something like that. Of course, I think that our series is going to discuss that 87 50-man committee and stuff like that, where things started to reconcile. Anyway, those are some additional comments on my own experience with this. GBC authority basically replaced by guru. Absolute authority, at times, very strong. Strange things going on. Concerns and doubts. No one to talk to. And I'll say one other thing. When I got ordered to not come to the temple that I was in 1980, I called 4 Zonal Acharyas and asked them, would they allow me in their zone to do service, under the idea that I would be respectful to this guru position, but I was not going to accept them as a pure devotee of God who I have to fall down. I'll treat them as a God brother, a senior God brother. All 4 of them said, no, we don't want you. It was actually in 1980, late 80, there was 0 place I could go in ISKCON with that attitude. So, okay. What else would you like to say, Pancharatna Prabhu?
Picking up on that, there was like you had withdrawn, somewhere in the 80, 81, like that. I, from my little vantage point of Mayapur, didn't feel that kind of pressure that I had to distance myself from things. But I could continue to observe, and I did. And my observation was this ground swell was building, this groundswell of questions about the whole system. We find that in this period of time, the very question of Srila Prabhupada's intention for the society in his July 9th letter and his May 25th conversation, these things were now being brought back up. Well, what did he really want? And different ideas were starting to come in and being bounced around in discussions. And of course, we also have the revelations of misbehavior starting to come up and be talked about, and some really egregious misbehavior that did actually result in disciplining of different members in some sort of negotiated fashion, because the spirit was that we have to maintain this scenario. This is what Srila Prabhupada taught us about Guru. We have to somehow maintain it. And there was this idea, somebody commented that some devotee, one of the acharyas or so, on his way into going into some Guru Puja or something, commented to somebody, okay, now it's time to fake it till we make it.
No, it wasn't quite like that. You might have heard that from me.
I guess it was you, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this one guru that I was, living with, doing some service with, and subsequently, okay, you're not allowed to come to the temple. Okay, fine. Well, he was taking a position that maybe he wasn't the pure devotee of God. Maybe he wasn't an incarnation of one of the six Goswamis. Maybe he wasn't. And he also was making some directives to householders, that householders should start to live a household life and stuff like that. So he was becoming a little bit more, what would you say, normal or a little better. Well, a few of the other zonal acharyas caught wind of this, and at least 3, but it could have been 4 of them, flew in because they were going to straighten this guy out. And one of the fledgling disciples, he wasn't initiated yet, of this zonal person that I'm speaking of, he was really upset that they were going to come in and trim this zonal acharya's wings. So he hid a microphone in the meeting room that they were going to have with him. And oh my God, then of course I was outside the temple. I wasn't allowed to come in. This devotee brings these tapes over. I'm listening to them. Oh my God, I can't believe what they're saying. And so one of the things they were saying is this person who at that time was, let's say, the most prominent, or one of the most prominent of the zonal people. Okay, it's time to go down and see the little people. Let's get our garlands on, and let's fake it until we make it. It's like, oh, this is what goes on in closed rooms, okay?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how that story
and
was.
I would say that there's stories about others, so any sense in the group, there was this group think that had come about, being the chosen ones, that they had to support each other, and they had, and this mandate, this vision that they imagined, I have to say, had descended upon them.
Yeah.
They had to support it, and they had to uphold it. And any dissension or any one, it's like what is the weak link in a chain can, or the bad apple, whatever, would destroy the whole bunch. So they had to maintain this solidarity in their group, and that sense of needing to maintain that made it impossible for things to kind of even within themselves to kind of try to address things. So there was cover up after pushing aside, maintaining these images, and while all of this is going on, so the devotees are watching, like you and others are watching all this happen, and what is this? What Srila Prabhupada wanted, and but what did he want? And so different theories started to evolve. The theory that we're supposed to be waiting for the Mahabhagavata Acharya, we stop, there should be no gurus until some self-effulgent, because that, Srila Prabhupada had spoken about in reflection of the Gaudiya Math, the idea of a self-effulgent Acharya appearing, etc. And that these ideas came, and then other ideas that, Srila Prabhupada was he intended to continue to be the Guru Acharya, and others would simply initiate it. That the Ritvik concept came up. Various ideas came up from various quarters, and they started to percolate. And it was 1985 when that big meeting took place in New Vrindavan. Papers had been written, discussions, groups had been formed. There are documents from that era which you can find online, particularly Ravindra's paper you can find if you want to, that describe some of these things going on. I went to that meeting in 1985. There were some very interesting occurrences. You had revelations of more fall downs, more, breaking of principles, etc. You had all kinds of things were just coming to a boil, and different directions were going. And one of those directions, there was someone in the group presented one of the acharyas presented a paper basically saying that, yes, we need to recognize the self-effulgent acharya, and without naming anyone, it was obvious who he was talking about. But anyway, so this was all happening. So yeah, this was turmoil. It was just, where do we go? What do we do? Was going on, and it was, like you said, it was devotees were leaving, and those who were staying were struggling, and it was very. Like you said,
obviously
tough times.
Yeah, and we've been concentrating on zonal acharya because they were GBCs and zonals. Our series is GBC. Something I just don't know, and I would encourage Kaunteya Prabhu, who's the initiator of this series. What were these other GBCs who were not zonal acharyas doing during these days? Because on the surface, without any knowledge, I'd have to say that they were complicit in this, not doing anything, but maybe behind the scenes, they were fighting and arguing for some sanity to take place or something. It'd be good to know what the non-zonal acharya GBC members were thinking and doing during these days, because they as a group are the ultimate managing authority of this movement.
Yes, and we do plan to have some of them on our event, on another episode, or maybe multiple episodes of this GBC history. We are already in contact with some of them. Today, I had the news that one of them was a GBC in 1978, but did not become a guru, has agreed to be interviewed. So we'll hear directly from them. One question I would like to ask you both, and I'm sure it's something you must have also meditated in these years. Is there any way of seeing the first devotees who took up this, especially those who had a lot of problems eventually, somewhat as a victim of a system or of a culture? They were, when they took this position, was given, you could say, this position as first gurus, either by Srila Prabhupada directly or by the GBC, but they were given this extraordinary position. And obviously they were much younger than you are today, both in terms of years in the movement. Now they had 8, 9, maybe maximum 10 years in the movement. And now you have about 50 years in the movement. They were much younger in age. They were 27, 28, 30, or maybe a little more. And of course, you're much more mature and experienced. I remember a couple of them being grihastas when they became gurus. And I heard that there was this culture, this pressure. Now you're a guru, you have to be a sannyasi. You cannot be a grihasta guru. I heard one of them at the several children. The youngest was 9-year-old, I hear, and somehow he had to take sannyas. Of course, there is free will, but somehow, would you like to reflect or elaborate on this particular perspective? It's an option. You don't have to embrace it. That somehow these were also somewhat victimized by the whole situation and circumstance.
Well, to choose to use that lens, were they victims? I would quickly then create a spectrum. And there may have been a few that became victimized, so to speak. And there were definitely others that they just absolutely loved the power, and they weren't a victim, so to speak. They were a victimizer, and that's all there is to it. So I think I think the answer is in a spectrum. And you know, when you're struggling with material energy, there is a tendency to either be a victim or be a victimizer. That's part of the nature of the material world. So some of that could be there. There's no question that every one of the zonal acharyas did very wonderful service for Srila Prabhupada. And that's one of the reasons why they were initially asked to be the Ritvik initiator. I think that was like May or June of '77 to initiate on behalf of Srila Prabhupada. Frankly, the way I chose and choose to look at all of them is to see the good that they had brought the movement, the leadership that they had brought, and wish to both ignore the problems they created, while at the same time simultaneously holding them responsible for their actions. So, yeah, it's not quite the simple answer that you asked for.
Yeah, I guess my response would be similar, except to say that we all, in one sense, were a victim of our own immaturity and our own, lack of understanding and just. So there was definitely a combination of things, and the culture of the society at the time, the culture of authority that had arisen prior to this. I mean, the culture of strong, authoritative leaders whose mood of management was somewhat dictatorial. Coming before I came to Mayapur, I was in New York for 5 years, and I went through. We had a GBC who had some of these tendencies, and went off and so on, and had we had to deal with it at the time. But the idea, and then in 1976, when I moved to Mayapur, we had the first revolution in ISKCON between the grihastas and the sannyasis. I remember when I first came to Mayapur in 1976, I was called to Srila Prabhupada's room, and in order to report on New York, basically. But I was also asked to report on the closing of the Dallas Gurukula. And when I walked in, I saw this circle. Srila Prabhupada was sitting at his desk, and there was this circle of dandas. Not circle, but a semicircle facing him. And the mood you could see was danda is danda. Like there's another term. What does danda mean? It's the controlling rod that the danda must control, and that actually the grihasta ashram is tolerated, almost to speak. And there was it's very interesting to go back to the 1976 GBC resolutions. When you go into the history of the GBC, to see the resolutions of whatever is March 13th, 14th, whatever, these days before the temple presidents came, before the festival, you see the resolutions that were passed. And then you see the resolutions afterwards. Resolution of such and such rescinded. Resolution of such and such date rescinded. Resolution of such and such, So there was this attempt on the behalf of a GBC that had developed already. I mean, this is prior to, Srila Prabhupada's departure. The GBCs of that time had developed this, the majority of them had developed this authoritative tendency. And it carried on. And those who were clever, could work with it and become part of a mechanism that everyone was kind of happy. Because those devotees, I should say, I wasn't in America, but I observed more from Australia and Europe and those devotees there. And I saw how the people who learned how to work with it, they enjoyed, it's just like how does it say that, the servants of the king enjoy the facilities of the king. They also enjoyed it. They enjoyed it.
Absolutely. One point about that New York event, didn't Srila Prabhupada either say in a conversation or write a letter admonishing the circle of devotees around as to why they allowed these things to continue?
Yeah, we've been looking for that letter. It's definitely everyone's kind of recollection, though we can't pinpoint it, that he basically forgave and blessed, you could say, the rank and file of the temple for going along and accepting the authority of the devotee who had committed some egregious acts, but chastised or admonished the leaders who didn't take enough action at the time.
Yeah.
So, yes.
And then, personally, I look back at 1980, 81, 82, 83. I just didn't have the maturity at the time to directly confront properly all of this stuff. I saw, especially in 85, 80, 84, 85, some of my godbrothers confronting this stuff, but I was critical of the way they were going about doing it, because it didn't strike me as having the level of maturity necessary to actually straighten things out and make something happen. So Kaunteya, long answer to your question. Kind of spun out a little bit.
Thank you. So we are 5 minutes from our mark, and if you like to add anything from those years or from contemporary present reflections and learnings about those tumultuous years in a number of ways, formative years, please go ahead.
I personally, I feel grateful for the few Zonal Acharyas that ended up making it through. I think it might be 4 in number. I'm not sure. I feel grateful to somehow or other the accumulation of all the devotees kept ISKCON together. Coulda, shoulda, would-haves are always there. Could have done it sooner. Could have confronted it. Maybe they couldn't have. Maybe there was just so much strength in those 11 for that period of time. And I think that the GBC, because this is a GBC series, I think they coalesced a little bit more at a certain point in time and started to find their own rudder. And that was good. Of course, you know, time will tell whether they did, whether they've been doing enough or not to hold the society together. But the GBC ultimately did something about it. And I feel grateful for that too. So those are my closing thoughts.
We haven't really explored that much the relationship with the Gaudiya Math at this time and how that factored in to everything, and how, you know, the influence, the initial influence, but then the later pullings apart that started to take place, in which relationships with the Gaudiya Math actually played a factor. That's another dimension to this, which deserves exploration, probably in some other format. Another dimension that I think can be examined in this period of time is the maturation of the GBC as a body. I was just going back and looking at the minutes from those times, and saw how this was also the time when the GBC started to adopt some rules of order and some parliamentary procedures and some ways of conducting business that, you know, finding their foothold. Because prior to this, it was a very sort of collegial thing when practically speaking, aside from 1 or 2 GBC meetings, the GBC meeting was a meeting with Prabhupada. It was not a meeting where they had to figure things out on their own. It was always a meeting where they were figuring things out and then bringing it to Srila Prabhupada. That was the system. This is now they've got to do it on their own. And how to do that, how to manage through issues, they were definitely finding their feet during this time.
Yeah. And Kaunteya Prabhu, there is one other thing that could be a very important point. What we saw in these days was a relatively small amount of people that had an outrageous amount of influence in the society. And the GBC has to create structures to make that very difficult to happen in the future. Now, you and I, because we work with the GBC and the Organizational Development Committee, etc., you know, we've suggested and even are working on a few things, the Constitution. There could be other things that could be done, but the GBC has to protect itself from the possibility that a smaller group of people command such level of influence. I think that's quite possibly the major point that comes out of this whole torrid affair, which at the same time there were positive things. And then I want to say one more thing. There's a certain class of devotee in this movement. They took initiation from one of these Zonal Acharya people, the majority of which fell down. And there's even some that then took second initiation from another Zonal Acharya who fell down. And their faith in Srila Prabhupada, their faith in Krishna consciousness continued. And for all the suffering that all those people went through, many of them leaving Krishna consciousness, which is the saddest thing, I fall at the feet of these devotees that made it through, that they somehow stuck it through. They are absolutely wonderful devotees. They made it through this whole thing. So I forgot to say that. That's, you know, feel very, very bad of all the devotees that really suffered. And I feel really great about these people that managed to keep their devotion forward.
All right. Hare Krishna.
Would you be willing to take one or two questions from our chat?
Well, I'm looking at some of the stuff in the chat, and I have to tell you that I don't think that there's some things that I would be wanting to comment on. You know, whether the GBC is infiltrated by the CIA or whether you know, they're predominantly Jews or something. I mean, I don't know. Which questions on this chat would you think I should answer?
Well, I mean,
I can answer a couple of them. I don't think that they were infiltrated by the CIA, and I don't think that you know, whether they're Jews or whether they're the WASPs or whatever they are, we are in the business of walking away from our material designations and manifesting our spiritual nature. So yeah.
Sure. At the same time, see, this is a question from our friend. This is a rabbi from Detroit, actually. Great collector of the ISKCON books and regular attendee at the Sunday program. Now, he's asking that after Srila Prabhupada left, there was a lingering anti-Semitism and philo-Semitism that became big dividing line. A simple question: did you perceive that?
But when you were speaking, oh, you're talking about anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Did you perceive any of that?
I had no awareness of any such thing.
I also, I really.
I had no awareness.
No. I think at least that much maturity, I believe we had achieved, where we looked beyond the religious, you know, backgrounds of the devotees. Now, you know, was there sort of a, you know, sometimes there might have been some jokes made or something that related to particular personalities and the way they did things, but it was always, in my experience, was always very lighthearted. No, I really didn't perceive anything like that personally.
Our philosophy is based on, you know, the attributes, characteristics, qualities of the Supreme Lord, and in part it's based on that. And we are trained that as wishing to become devotees, we want to develop in a direct, clear, real, spiritual way the qualities of a devotee. So we're naturally tuned into looking at qualities. So what I have found in my over here secular world, because I do business over here in the devotional community, I have found that the devotees are a little bit more talking in generalities about, okay, well, the Indians, they're like this, okay, the Europeans are like that, Okay, Americans are like this. Okay, the Australians, they're all whatever. I do believe that devotees generalize about different kinds of people a little bit more than what I find in the secular world. So that I'll say. So maybe the people of Jewish background, devotees, that maybe they have a little something in common because that's their history. So okay, maybe they hang out. And maybe the Indian devotees, they feel a little bit more comfortable with Indian devotees, so they hang out. That kind of stuff. But this is not to extend this into a big controversy or something like that. Yeah. You're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. So the last question maybe for today is the following. Obviously, for some of our viewers, all these revelations of the troubles that the movement had, especially in its spiritual leadership, could be very confusing. This is God's movement, God's mission. How could so many mistakes, weaknesses be manifested? In particular, we have a question possibly inspired by these problems. It sounds like a very innocent question, and not any propaganda. They say, also, is Ritvik system being followed today? Is how much justified? Ritvik system, we understand, is the concept, the idea that we shouldn't have the present gurus or regular gurus, but people should still act as priests, officiating on behalf of Srila Prabhupada, and everybody should become still, more than 40 years after he left this world, still everybody should become a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. So, can you say a few things about this, specifically the Ritvik theory, or we could call it heresy, and this idea that maybe newer people maybe a little could be confused by these problems that happen. We are analyzing the 80s, but we had problems also in other decades.
Maybe Pancharatna Prabhu wishes to speak on this. I don't think I will, because I think that there are devotees that can do a much better job answering this question from a philosophical point of view. From my point of view, on some things, I haven't studied them in depth. This is one that I haven't bothered to study in depth, and I'll tell you why I haven't bothered. It's all nonsense. So, it's kind of like, why bother studying it? I don't have any question in my mind or doubt. Srila Prabhupada is not wishing us to follow the Jesus Christ syndrome of, everybody is initiated by Jesus Christ, plain and simple.
I've been, as I said, I was not so much into the papers and the activities of the Zonal Acharya time, but I was very much connected with the Ritvik revolution in India, because my friends were very much part of that, and I did have a long occasion as a member of the Indian leadership at the time to get involved in all these issues, and I have to say that I have studied it, and etc. My conclusion, personally, now I'm speaking for myself. My conclusion, because I was friends with so many of these devotees, I had to listen to them. I had to really try to be open, and I ended up with the conclusion that their assumption, their conclusion that Srila Prabhupada's intention in his July 9th letter, which they call the final order, is wrong. But that's it's my conclusion. But I have to say that it's wrong because, not on its surface, because yes, you can legitimately interpret things to be a certain way. there is enough there that you could say, this is my conclusion. So somebody who reaches that conclusion, I feel, okay, you came to that conclusion. I look at everything and I look at the evidence and I say, well, I have to make a different conclusion. Srila Prabhupada didn't, in the clearest possible, black and white legal terms, rule out your conclusion. But all of the things that he said, the history of our parampara, we have to make a decision here. And the most reasonable decision that we can make, and with the intention of doing what Srila Prabhupada intends us to do. That's what we have to try to do. We have to try to do what he wants us to do. And to do that, when there's some question of what he wants us to do, we have to go back and study not just one letter or one statement, but we have to go back and look at, the history. And we've been talking about this, that in order to really fully appreciate Srila Prabhupada's intentions for this society, his vision and his direction, we have to be able to broaden and take in a wide range of his personal behavior, his activities, the activities of our parampara, his writings in numerous places. And when I do that personally, I come to Gopal Bhatta's conclusion. It's nonsense to think that he wanted to remain the sole initiator for the society.
And by the way, because it's GBC history, the GBC took a very strong and unambiguous stand on this. And in fact, they even expelled some of the promoters of this heresy. So, any last words from you?
If I'm going to make a last word, I'm just once again from the Zonal Acarya Days, I just pray for all those devotees that lost their faith. And I just honor the people that stuck it out. And their spiritual master falling apart. They somehow stuck it out. Those are like the most prominent feelings that I have about the whole period.
I echo your sentiments and your feelings, but I also feel that the work is not yet done, completed. That there are still issues that came up during that time regarding the how authority for initiation comes into a person that aren't resolved. There are still issues about and there's been papers written in the GBC about parallel lines of authority and how those issues play out. The corresponding roles of being a GBC and a initiating guru for others. There are still things that we need to resolve, and I would say this series is part of just talking about these things, and let's see where it goes.
Yeah. I Kaunteya Prabhu, this just noticed. I was just scrolling through some of this, and maybe if you could copy this for us, or Shamasaki, Devi, if you could copy some of these comments. I just jumped on this one here right now, okay? And this comment goes like this: we unreservedly and humbly beg the forgiveness of Prajumna Prabhu for any offenses caused to him by our dealings. We would also like to extend our most heartfelt invitation to Prajumna Prabhu to participate actively in ISKCON activities. And we pray that Srila Prabhupada and Sri Sri Radhamadava continue to bestow their causeless blessings upon him.
That was from the 1999 GBC resolution you're reading.
Okay. So yeah, that anyway, I just happened to see that, and I wanted to read that because I certainly feel strongly about Pradyumna Prabhu.
I hope to see him soon. He lives in New York.
So give him my regard.
I will.
And I'm sure that you give him Devala's regard, because Devala has a nice relationship with him too.
Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this was episode number 4 of GBC History, and we had the great honor and pleasure to have the senior most members of the GBC strategic planning team, His Grace Gopal Bhatta Prabhu, His Grace Pancharatna Prabhu, with the technical support of our Shyamasaki Devi. If you'd like to show your face for a moment, you have been behind many of these events. Thank you, Shyamasaki Devi.
Thank
We
you.
are very grateful to your support. So, thank you very much. And in one sense, this series is just warming up. So look forward to more episodes on the GBC History on this channel of the GBC Strategic Planning Team. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hari Bol.
Haribol.